I mean, it kind of makes sense because, you're on a ship. If it catches fire, where can you go? You either fight it or whatever. And, but we went into these metal compartments that they had built. They'd light a fire, big oil fire inside, and you go in with a hose and do your best. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I found out that was, I guess there were two different investigations of Forrestal fire, but the one thing they both agreed on was don't use fog foam, that AFFF foam, and don't follow it up with water. The AFFF is supposed to smother the fire. Well, you go hosing it down with water, you blow the AFFF away. That was one of the things that helped us burn longer, I guess you could say.
Right.
But it seemed like, again, just reading the investigation reports, and in one of them, the primary investigation was 7,500 pages long. So it's pretty detailed. But it looked like, the first few explosions that happened so quickly really killed a lot of the experts. So a lot of the folks who followed behind didn't have the highest level of training. So I think that's where you saw people struggling to even align some of the AFFF systems, which were made easier after that. So pretty much all left aligned and push this button on the ships I served in very, very easy as a result of some of those lessons learned. But when you lose all your experts, then you're going to wind up with folks who are well-meaning, but don't realize that, hey, the foam is providing that blanket, preventing oxygen from reaching the fuel, and as soon as we wash it away with salt water, we're going to get a reflash.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we're at 7 o'clock, so I'm going to let everybody else into the Zoom room.
All right, we're going to play our theme song. Hit it, Ellie.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club for Monday, August 2nd. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. And with me as wingman tonight is the Executive Director, Todd DiPastino. Todd, how's it going?
Good. I'm happy to be wingman tonight. I'm happy to support you. And I see we have Jean Klebingott, World War II veteran. Hello, Jean. Hello, Rosemarie. Beaming to us, we have Connor. Good to see you, Connor, from Lafayette, Louisiana. And Caleb. I failed to say hello to you last time, Caleb. I know you were on. Caleb is another one of our historians, collectors. He has collected. Caleb, how many autographs do you have in your collection?
Of veterans or autographs in general?
Let's say everybody, autographs in general.
Over 10,000.
10,000. Wow.
Yeah.
And he doesn't sell them. He didn't sell them.
I was going to say
not a single
2,000. I was going to guess 2, but that's incredible.
And you get them through the mail, correct?
Yes.
Wow.
How long have you been doing it?
Technically since 2012.
Okay, so
So
you're
about
you're averaging about
9 years.
1,000 per year.
Yeah. And that's not like necessarily 10,000 people. It's just sometimes, they send extra stuff. So, it's about over 10,000 individual signed items.
Wow.
And many of them are veterans, right? You do highlight veterans in your collection.
There's got to be at least over 1,000 autographs from just veterans for sure in the collection. I just got Herschel Williams in today, so.
Oh, excellent. Good. Congratulations. Good. Very good. Oh, and we have Larry Gamrett. Hello, Larry. Good to see you. Good to haven't seen you in a while.
Sorry, Ken.
So yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. Sean,
Mhm.
I'm the wingman. I'm not going to talk too much.
No, it's okay. I don't know if there's a particular, like, if in an F-14, if the wingman just like chats with you because he's chilling back there, and you know.
If I'm the wingman in the F-14, I'm definitely talking. I'm probably screaming. But you know, I'm a historian. I like to do this day in history, and I just want to very quickly get this day in history. Oh, and we have Larry Gamrett. Hello. Yep. Right. Okay. Let's see. Ellie, could you stop sharing your sound? And then I could share my screen, and I could show you this artifact that comes from this day in history 82 years ago. 82 years ago, on August 2nd, 1939, Albert Einstein wrote a letter to Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And in the letter, he said, you know what? My friend and I have figured out that you could take uranium and make a bomb out of it. And Einstein actually didn't know that, believe it or not, in earlier in the month, or in July 1939, Albert Einstein did not know that you could create an atomic bomb. He had to be convinced of it, and he was convinced of it by his friend, a fellow physicist named Leo Szilard, pictured here on the right. Szilard is the one who conceived of the chain reaction in 1933. He was crossing a street, and he said that, you know, he was waiting to cross, thinking about some experiments that he had been doing. By the time he reached the other end of the street, he understood that you could create a nuclear chain reaction and create a big explosion. And so he was kind of working theoretically on the possibility of of fission and chain reaction. And he read in the newspaper that after Nazi Germany took over Czechoslovakia, they were banning the export of uranium from Czechoslovakia. And he thought, oh my gosh, they realize it too. They realized that you could split the uranium atom, release a lot of energy, create a chain reaction, and invent a very destructive bomb. So he wanted to warn President of the United States, President Roosevelt. This is before the German invasion of Poland. He wanted to warn Roosevelt, but he knew that his letter wouldn't get to Roosevelt because who the heck knows who Leo Szilard is. So Szilard called his friend Albert Einstein, who was at that time a celebrity, and said, hey, you've got to warn the president about the uranium and the bomb. And Einstein said, what are you talking about? And Szilard said, you could create a bomb out of uranium. And Einstein said, no, you can't. And Szilard had to go to Long Island, meet with Einstein, kind of show him the evidence. And Einstein said, oh my gosh, you're right. And immediately wrote this interesting letter to Roosevelt, in which he said, you know, some recent work by E. Fermi and Leo Szilard, which have been communicated to me in manuscript, leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate future. Certain aspects of the situation which have arisen seem to call for watchfulness and, if necessary, quick action on the part of the administration. Then he goes down and says, it is possible to set up a nuclear chain reaction in a large mass of uranium by which vast amounts of power and large quantities of new radium-like elements would be generated. Now it appears almost certain that this could be achieved in the immediate future, and this phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs. And then he says, I understand that Germany has actually stopped the export of uranium from Czechoslovakian mines, and that's probably why. And Franklin Roosevelt did respond, and he said, thank you for the note. We'll look into it. And that was the beginning of the Manhattan Project right there. So my little history lesson, that all began on August 2nd, 1939.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Do you know how close FDR and Einstein were? Or was it just Einstein had such a presence at that time that he respected him?
Einstein had a presence at the time. He was a professor at Princeton. He was, well-known, the most famous scientist in the world. Szilard was extremely well-known in the scientific community as a genius, but he wasn't a household word like Einstein was. Mm-hmm. Szilard, after the war, believe it or not, he was a physicist. Szilard retrained as a biologist after the war, which was good for him because he got bladder cancer. He treated himself with radiation.
Wow. Was he one of the first to receive radiation
I
treatment?
believe that his kind of radiation treatment, yes, he invented it. Yeah,
Wow.
he was one of these, polymath geniuses. But interesting little history. That's it. I'll
Thank
be
you.
quiet.
Well, I'm going to ask you about the next thing. We have some announcements, and really, I didn't introduce Ellie DiPastino, our media producer. Ellie, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
Can you tell me what your favorite part of this week's Scuttlebutt is?
Oh, well, I would say that my favorite part of this week's Scuttlebutt, which is a very fun episode, it's a Ryan's Rants episode where we hear from Ryan all about the new, let's see if I remember, ACFT, Army Combat Fitness Test. And he said, when you're doing those leg tucks in the ACFT, you look like a panda somehow. So I went and Googled what pandas doing leg tucks look like. Turns out I don't think he's that far off. So that's got to be my favorite part. I'll put the link to the episode in the chat here. You should definitely, it's 13 minutes. Go have a listen and have a watch.
Well, don't sell yourself short either, Ellie, because you created a 3-minute cut of the Scuttlebutt episode for TikTok, which is hysterical. And I highly recommend it to everybody here that if Ellie will put the link in the chat, give yourself 3 minutes of watching this and try not to laugh. It's fantastic. And it's awesome watching pandas actually try to do pull-ups, which she did find. Also, we have an event coming up this Saturday. I'll share my screen here. Todd, do you want to give us a bit of history or background on this?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just Googling pandas doing pull-ups. Yeah, this is Heather Penny. We're working with the community, military community support project to bring Heather Penny in. And she was an F-16 fighter pilot on September 11th, 2001 for the Washington, D.C. National Guard when she got an order to go into the air, try to track down United Flight 93 and bring it to the ground. And she said something like, but the F-16 isn't armed. They didn't have time to arm this thing. And they said, well, you'll figure it out. So in the air, she and her commander who were in the air together, they decided if they were going to find the airplane, they would ram it and bring it down. It was a suicide mission. Of course, Flight 93 was taken over by the passengers and crashed into a field in Shanksville, Western Pennsylvania. She never got to find Flight 93, but she then her mission became escorting George W. Bush back from Florida to Washington that day. So she's coming to Pittsburgh. She's going to be speaking at the John Hines History Center on Saturday, August 7th at 1 p.m. And it's going to be a free event. You do have to register for it. So Ellie, if you could find the registration, the Hines History Center is doing the registration for the event. If you could put the registration here on Zoom and on the Facebook side, that would be great. And then Sean and I are going to live stream the event also. So we are going to host it here on Zoom, and it'll be our usual Zoom link. And we will also simulcast it on Facebook and YouTube. So that is Saturday, August 7th at 1 p.m.
And also coming up next Monday, we have Cyril Wecht joining us.
Yeah, this is fun. This is especially for anybody who's from Pittsburgh, the world's most, I said, he calls himself the world's most controversial forensic pathologist. He's probably the world's most famous forensic pathologist, Dr. Cyril Wecht. He lives in Pittsburgh. He's 90 years old, and he was a pathologist in the Air Force. And that's where he met his wife, and he has some good Air Force stories. So he is going to join us, talk about his Air Force career, and I think the rest of his career. And so we look forward to having him. And if any of you know Cyril Wecht at all, have you heard him maybe on the radio or on TV, you know that man can talk and can tell some stories. So we will be here a week from tonight with Cyril Wecht.
In for a great night, always with VBC. I think that should be our new motto. But tonight we are here to honor those that lost their lives in the fire on the USS Forrestal. We have several USS Forrestal veterans joining us in the Zoom room. Phil Meyer, Ken Kilmeyer, and a Hank Stewart, Commander Hank Stewart, who wrote a thesis about the USS Forrestal and how you know, a lot of us know about how this changed the Navy, how it changed how sailors were trained. I'll share my screen here. We are. This was soon after the fire had started, if almost immediately after. Phil, I want to say a good evening to you and Commander Stewart. Hank, thank you for joining us tonight.
Got to be here.
Before we went live, Phil, you mentioned that there was a cameraman that was up on what did you say, the tower of the ship that turned his camera over this way. Would this be the view from what he had there?
Yes, that is from the the island. It's where everything that goes on a ship starts in the island. That's where they steer it from and all the rest of that. Mm-hmm. But they film all launches and recoveries. So that every time there's a plane going off or a plane coming in on a carrier, they have it on TV. And you just happen to be there. Because we were launching they call it an Alpha strike against North Vietnam. We had already launched one. They were on their way back when, we're going to launch the second one. And the second one is what you saw a picture of there. Mm-hmm. Everybody was loaded with bombs and all ready to go. They line up on a catapult and get shot off. And that never happened.
Yeah. And that was due to what I read was an electrical anomaly on a Zuni missile that misfired when a pilot switched his power from external to internal, which caused the rocket to fire off and go right into either John McCain or the pilot next to him into their planes. It sort of hit there and started the fire.
It hit that Zuni come off an F-4 Phantom. Mm-hmm. They had jumped out. There's different safety switches. They're designed on those aircraft so they can't shoot a missile off or a rocket off while they're sitting on a flight deck. Mm-hmm. Well, they jumped. One of the aviation electricians' mates had jumped that switch out because this was a max effort against the North. Mm-hmm. And usually you would ground the airplane, they'd fix it, and it would go back into service. Well, they wanted everybody off, or get as many aircraft off as possible. So yeah, they bring a start card up to the jets. They bleed air in, which gets the turbines going, and they also provide 28 volts DC, I think. Then the pilot, once the jets are going, the generators come online, he switches from external power to internal power. Mm-hmm. That's when the missile went off. And it shot like straight across the flight deck. And the missile didn't blow up. When it hit John McCain's belly tank, he had an A-4 Skyhawk, parked across the street from him. The missile didn't blow up. The rocket didn't. But what it did is just the sheer velocity exploded the belly tank, and fuel went everywhere. Consequently, fire went everywhere because the rocket was, raging flame out the back of it. And then it was time to get out of the airplanes. Mm-hmm. And we heard they first announced fire in the flight deck aft. So I was in navigation, and we were on I think it was the O2 level, was our berthing compartment. O2 is 2 decks up from the hangar bay. So there was a way we could get out of our compartment and up a ladder and down a hallway and up another ladder, and you're out right on the edge of the flight deck in the catwalks, and you get into the catwalks. Well, we all start, and a couple other guys, hey, let's go look, off we go. We got out there just as we reached the catwalk, just as bomb went off, and then start, general quarters, all hands man your battle stations. And then we turned around and ran back in. And we still didn't realize what was going on. I mean, we didn't realize the thing about bombs. Well, my battle station was all the way at the aft end of the ship. You had to go out to the fantail and go down into the fantail, one deck. That was port side emergency steering. If you cannot navigate the ship from the bridge, you can switch to what they called secondary con, which was all the way at the bow end of the ship. And on the older carriers, you could see, like the end of the flight deck, you'll see all these little portholes up front. Well, that's secondary cons in there. If they can't get to that, they can shift to after steering. There's a port side after steering and a starboard side after steering. And there's hydraulic units, and there's like an emergency supply, electric supply system, and there's hydraulic pumps. From either side, we only had 2 rudders that worked. I mean, could actually move. Mm-hmm. And you could either, if the guy on the port side, was engaged and all that, they transfer back to that. He could move the port rudder, and the guy on the other side, on the starboard side, he could move the starboard rudder. So you're all tied together, and you were supposed to, when you say, go 10 degrees right, both after steering are supposed to turn the wheels 10 degrees right. Well, right above that was a little room. Oh, heck, maybe 5 feet square. It had an electric motor, and had a hydraulic pump and a wheel. Just a little, like almost like a water, shut off. But if you wanted to move the rudder, you had that little electric pump going, and that would, the little electric motor going, which would start to create pressure with the hydraulic pump. Then you could steer from up there. It was very, very crude, very elementary. But if you needed it, it would work. When I was coming down the ladder past our berthing compartment down to the flight deck, to the hangar bay, just I got this one big ladder, a bomb went off. And you just never felt, I'm about in the middle of the ship, and everything, all this other stuff was going on aft of the island. You have no idea. That whole ship rung like a bell. It was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life.
And these were 1,000-pound, 500-pound bombs that were going off. These weren't small.
No, they were 1,000-pound bombs. They're World War II 1,000-pound bombs that we had just gotten the day before from an underway replenishment ship that's sending us bombs across and missiles. And I picked myself up off the floor because it knocked me down the steps or down the ladder. So I get into the hangar bay and I look aft, I start to run aft to where I had to be. But there was flames everywhere. It was incredible. I could not get to my general quarters station because when the bombs blew through, when the bombs went off, they blew through the hangar deck. They blew down into the fantail, and everything aft was on fire. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that came to mind was, oh my God, I hope Jim can get out of there. Jim was a friend of mine who was he was an after steering. He relieved me on watch. I had the 4 in the morning to 8 in the morning watch. Jimmy had the 8 in the morning till noon watch, and he'd relieve me. And it was 2 hours, a little over 2 hours from the time he relieved me to the first bomb went off. Mm-hmm. And now what do? The Navy teaches you go to whatever you have to go to your general quarters station. You have to get there. Well, I couldn't get there. There's no way to get through all the flames and
the heat.
It was, it was just horrible. So I'm back up the ladders, and I got into the island, went up on a bridge, and my division officer was up there. I used a navigator. I was in, again, navigation.
Time-wise, sorry to interrupt, Phil. Time-wise, how much time had elapsed at this point from when the fire started? We're talking minutes?
Yeah, 15 minutes, maybe
Okay.
15 minutes.
Mhm.
So I can't get to my general quarters station. I go up and see my division officer. What am I going to do? He says, just stay up here. We'll try to figure something out. And there's a communication system on a ship. It's called the sound powered phones. You get a headset, you get this mic's got a boom on it. I got one of them. I think it was off the guy that was on the engine order telegraph. So let me borrow your headset. I called down to Jim, who was in after steering, to see if he was okay. And he was trapped. There's no way he could get out. When a bomb blew through the flight deck, there was one guy in after steering. He was trying to get out. He had a different general quarter station. He was halfway up the ladder when the bomb went off and blew down into there. He was a machinist mate, I believe. And then the electrician's mate was standing there waiting for him to get up the ladder so he could go up.
Mm-hmm.
And it got him good. I mean, it killed the machinist mate. The electrician's mate, I think, was badly wounded. Well, Jim was tending to the I guess it was the electrician's mate. There were three of us down there: machinist mate, electrician's mate, and a quartermaster. The quartermaster was turning a wheel.
What was the sense on the ship and the sailors you were with? Like, was it general? Was it get the job done? Was it general panic? Like, what was the feel?
There was no panic at all. I mean, I'm sure initially, it was one of those, what the hell was that?
Mm-hmm.
And then word gets around fast. And then when he said, when they went to general quarters, everybody knows, okay, this is, they also say, it's a general quarters. This is not a drill. General quarters.
I'll have to admit, Phil and I, we just met. I am not a veteran, so I don't know what general quarters is. Can you tell me? That's just
everybody
chalk that up to a civilian question.
Everybody on a ship has a place they have to be at if something bad happens. Like general quarters, you have what they call battle stations.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's assigned to a battle station. And when they call general quarters, you go to your battle station and whoever's there, you kind of like relieve me. Okay, you get out of here and I'm here. Again, my general quarters station was aft, port side aft emergency steering. Just a little place.
Mm-hmm.
They drill it into you. You have to go there, drop whatever you're doing and get to your general quarters station. So as soon as they say this is not a drill, again, we have general quarters drills all the time.
You have the beeline there immediately.
Yeah. But they always start with, this is a drill, general quarters. Well, this time we said, this is not a drill. So then, it's serious business.
Mm-hmm. And at this point, the first couple bombs that went off, they eliminated pretty much the fire control teams. Damage.
They disappeared. They disappeared. When the bombs went off, well, the first bomb got Chief Farrier, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the first bomb got Chief Farrier. And then there were damage control crews. There's firefighting equipment on the flight deck. I mean, you can get it from the island. There's, and I think along the catwalks, there's hoses, nozzles and all that stuff that you would need, and there's valves you can turn them on with. There you go. That guy was a real hero. That guy was a real hero.
You talk a little bit about that, Phil?
Chief Farrier.
Yeah.
You got to think. I mean, he was a serious, no nonsense guy. I mean, I had met him. I didn't know him, but I'd met him. But he was up on a flight deck and he knew those planes were armed with bombs. And he knew that now those bombs are on fire. But he still grabbed a fire extinguisher, ran to the fire, hoping that he could put it out. And he ran in and there's this immense explosion and he's no more. There's no more Farrier. he knew what was going on, and he knew he had to do something about it. And he went towards the fire instead of away from it.
He was among the first. He was among the first to be killed.
Yes.
And
yes.
when you're saying that there were no remains, I mean, literally, they never found any remains of him. He was
No,
considered
they-
missing in action, presumed dead.
Now, I don't know if they ever found any remains, but I know he just disappeared, was gone.
The
In the fire extinguisher was gone.
The Navy's biggest firefighting school in Norfolk, Virginia is named after him now.
There you go.
Yeah, he did not, from what I could see, and Hank, you might know this better than I do, but I couldn't see that he received the Navy Cross posthumously or anything like that. But he did get this firefighting school named after him that generations, literally generations of sailors have gone through to become Navy firefighters. And they graduate, and here's a class going on exercises.
In periodic refresher firefighting training, I served on 3 ships in Norfolk, and we sent firefighting crews multiple times through that firefighting school. Not sure, I can't recall if he was posthumously awarded any kind of other recognition. That wasn't really the thing for the Navy back in those days, is my sense, compared to nowadays.
Mhm.
As I said, we had gone through a firefighting school at Great Lakes Naval Training Station. And it's nowhere near as good as what it is now. I just have to imagine. But they'd have big tanks with, like JP4 on oil, I think it was, on NSFO, naval standard fuel oil. And they let them on fire, and smoky as hell.
Mhm.
And it was up to us to try to put them out, which we did.
Did firefighting change from World War II to the Forrestal? What I was looking at was that they actually had switched up and then kind of reverted to using teams, sort of a Japanese style, from what I read. Hank, do you know anything about them?
Well, there are a lot of lessons learned and recommendations put into place. I suspect a lot of the Navy veterans have heard of another terrible fire in 1969, so a couple years later, on the flight deck of the Enterprise, which was much better, largely as a result of lessons learned from the Forrestal. And I think the biggest thing wasn't that the equipment didn't change much in a couple of years. The kind of organization didn't change much, but there was an increased emphasis on getting folks through the firefighting schools. The numbers were actually, the folks who had the most current training, many of them were killed, as Philip said, in kind of the initial instance of the Forrestal fire. That wasn't the case in Enterprise. They had a much higher proportion of folks who very recently, before the ship deployed, had been through that firefighting training, and that's credited with reducing the material cost as well as the loss of life from that Enterprise fire just a couple years later. So it seems like if you look over history, the Navy's damage control tends to be cyclical. At the beginning of World War II, and the Navy generated hundreds of battle reports from various damage, all the way from mishaps to enemy action in World War II, because the fleet reached nearly 5,000 ships by the end of the war. So just a tremendous body of knowledge out there. And there was so much studying that was kind of condensed into these damage control manuals that the firefighters, that really the damage controlmen and the kind of the folks who run the Navy's firefighting school studied, and then the damage control kind of experts on the ship. So the rated damage controlmen, who are kind of like the ship's firefighters, who they're going to basically be the experts, and then they're going to train all the other sailors who have lots of other things to do, like navigate the ship and run the engineering plan and take care of the weapon systems as their day jobs. But as I think Philip was saying before we kind of kicked off, in the US Navy, kind of like in the Marine Corps, every Marine's supposed to be a rifleman regardless of what else they do. In the Navy, every sailor is expected to be a firefighter. So in an emergency, any sailor assigned to any ship should be able to step up and understand, with at least minimum proficiency, how to put on firefighting gear, how to attack a fire, and how to do their part to help save their ship. So the thing is, you have a lot of incidents in World War II, and a very small number in Korea and Vietnam, and a lot of that tends to be, ships are inherently dangerous with lots of, especially warships, with bombs and explosives and highly flammable fuel and pressurized fuel and hydraulic systems. So kind of inherently dangerous. But I think because we have so much practice, we, in a lot of cases, if there's a flammable leak or a small fire, it's taken care of very quickly. And nobody outside the Navy ever really is aware of it. And many inside the Navy aren't aware of it. But unfortunately, over time, I think you wind up with a little bit of complacency. Well, nothing bad has happened for a while. And in the 80s, fast forward to 1987, again, many lessons learned from the Forrestal had improved equipment, procedures. By then, it had been integrated into the Navy's firefighting schools, and USS Stark in 87 took a hit from an exocet, and the ship was nearly lost. And if you read the lessons learned from that, there are a lot of basic errors that were made. Again, proficiency wasn't where it needed to be. So across the board, and some folks would argue that had the ship been a little higher readiness, maybe they wouldn't have sustained that any hits. But later on, certainly it turned out that a lot of the lessons learned had not been practiced on that ship. So then damage control became really important, and that happened in 87. So the Navy had a very high emphasis on damage control for several years. I was commissioned in 1992. In the summer of 92, went through the Navy Surface Warfare Officer School for division officer training. And part of that was a pretty good section on damage control, where one of the first things they showed us was trial by fire, which was kind of the Navy's training film on the Forrestal fire. So that was, for a number of years, all sailors up in Great Lakes, as well as officers in Newport, got that training for many, many years. So I think exactly, and this is available. You can find it on YouTube now.
I'll put the link to your thesis also here in the chat. Hank,
yes, we should give Hank a proper introduction. That Hank is he'll demur, but I called him one of the experts on the USS Forrestal disaster, and certainly on the lessons learned from it. You did write a thesis about it. You are on the faculty now of the Maine Maritime Academy. Is that correct?
I am, and have been since I retired. So we, at the Maine Maritime Academy, we primarily train folks who are going for civilian merchant marine ships. So a lot of them are going to man civilian ships. Some of them will go to work for the Military Sealift Command and help resupply Navy ships, but many just go to tankers and drill rigs and civilian ships. But they face a lot of the same issues that we faced in the Navy. That fire is a constant threat, and if a fire breaks out, you want to contain it because your ship is really your best lifeboat. And in fact, we teach the students kind of the 10 tenets of Navy damage control, which I think a lot of the Navy veterans are familiar with. And basically, don't give up the ship, for the ocean is cold and deep. And in fact, the training ship behind us is a former naval auxiliary and still has open lifeboats. And I don't think any of us would want to be in an open lifeboat, particularly in the winter in the North Atlantic. So the ship really is the best lifeboat. And a lot of the lessons learned, I think, from the Forrestal have helped. Again, as long as the emphasis on training happens, has really prevented a lot of subsequent disasters from being as bad.
I'm showing a picture of the Bonhomme Richard, which is the most recent disaster. I mean, just catastrophic fire last year. You were the damage control officer on board this ship.
I was from 05 to 07. And I actually joined that ship when she was just a few piers away in dry dock at NASCO, which is a big dry dock owned by conglomerate just off to the side of the naval station. So she was in dry dock, and when I joined the ship, I was a little bit perturbed. And again, Bonhomme Richard was an amphibious assault ship, basically about half the size of a modern Nimitz class aircraft carrier.
A mini carrier, maybe.
Yeah, comparable in size to kind of the World War II Essex class carriers, about 45,000 tons. So a big ship. When I joined the ship, she actually was in dry dock, and there were some hazards. And as the incoming DCA or damage control assistant, my job was to make sure that the sailors in the ship's 10 repair lockers were all kind of ready, trained, ready to deal with anything. And shipyard workers, some of them are brand new, never been on ships before, and don't really understand, so they'll leave flammable materials laying around. So we had to get pretty aggressive with the shipyard workers. Had to, of course, there was a lot of work going on the ship when I joined her. So there were ventilation rigged, there were acetylene and oxygen hoses for welding gear that were rigged throughout the ship. In ships, and part of what was built into Forrestal is an improvement from kind of the older World War II and older carriers were these compartments that were even better subdivided. Bonhomme Richard was equipped with the ability to very quickly subdivide large parts of the ship. And that fire on Bonhomme Richard last year actually started low and aft. So towards the end of the ship, very low. And within hours, there were flames. Many of us saw on national news, flames shooting out from there. You see the bridge. So basically that fire traversed the ship, several decks vertically. Of course, heat tends to rise. Several decks vertically as well as longitudinally. And those compartments were not actually set. So all those watertight and smoke-tight boundaries were not set, allowing the flame to kind of traverse the open hangar bay. And you can see the holes in the side of the ship where it had burned through. I mean, just a terrible disaster. And what kind of happened was after, of course, I mean, we haven't seen the investigation results, but we can see visually what happened as the fire progressed, and really the smoke and the heat forced the duty section. Of course, this happened in port on, I forget now if it was a Saturday or Sunday morning, but on the weekend, forced the crew very quickly. The duty section was forced off, and then they were almost helpless watching their ship burn from the pier. So really a national asset lost because of the arson that was starting the fire that was allowed to spread unchecked.
And we do now know it was arson, and a sailor was charged with it just a few days ago.
I think arson and hazarded in a vessel, and probably lots of other things.
Okay,
But
I guess the good side of it is that no lives were lost. The bad side of it is what? This is a $2 billion ship or something like that.
well, that was about the cost back in '99 when she was commissioned. I think the Navy was estimating $4 to $5 billion to replace her, and it would have been, they said, probably 5 to 7 years just just because so much of the metal, you can't really trust metal that's been heated that high, the flight deck, for instance, and you wouldn't want to go to sea because you've actually changed the structure of the metal. So I believe the Forrestal cost, and I wrote kind of an update to my thesis in 2017, and at the time in $1967, the damage was 72 million, and 4 years ago that would have been equivalent to 528 million, where the damage was even far higher than that in today's dollar cost on Bonham Richard. And I believe it took a couple of years to get Forrestal back into frontline service.
Really, we if I can interrupt.
Sure, absolutely.
We got into the yards, and they essentially, as we were coming up the Elizabeth River, they had a huge crane. At the time, was the biggest crane on the East Coast. It was charged with lifting the, what was it, starboard aft elevator off the ship. You'd be amazed what fire does with one of those elevators. They're huge.
Right.
It was all buckled and terrible. So we got into yards. We were there for, I think, 6 to 9 months. But essentially what they did is they peeled back from the flight deck down, off, just gone. And they got all these huge logs, probably 12 by 12. They're really big. But anyway, when you walked into the hangar bay and you looked aft, it looked like a forest of logs, and that was holding from what they tore off on top. This was holding like the what would that be, the O2 level up, because they didn't just chop the whole ass end off, but they had a support. It was amazing how they did that. It's incredible what a bomb will do. You figure those flight decks, yeah, they're armored. Oh, yeah. Not for a 1,000-pound bomb or not. It just, it peels it back like you squish a grape, and you know how everything comes out. Well, that's the way it was, but it was down. Okay, that's taken from the, that's a camera from the island. And if you go right around, go see where all the guys are standing to the left there. If you do it like an about face and walk towards the forward end of the ship, you're going to run into the island. Well, alongside that island were rows and rows and rows of bombs on carts. What they would do, you launch the first strike. Second strike is getting ready, so they take all the bombs from the side of the island, from the starboard side of the island, wheel them out, and they load them on airplanes. While they're doing that, you got a strike that's coming back, so they bring all the bombs they need for that strike. They'll bring up and put on the starboard side of the island. Well, flames got to, you'll see an RA-5C Vigilante sitting there, all burnt and crashed up. Well, that's just a little bit after the island, and there was 100 tons of bombs sitting there, bombs and missiles. And I don't know, I had this feeling that as bad as things were going, that we're done. We were done. If things got to that bomb farm where the island was, on the starboard side of the island, we're done. And it's odd. I mean, you probably heard about this, but you get a strange calm that comes over you. That's the back end of the island. There you go. And that's a vigilante there. Anyway, all of a sudden it's calm. It's like, okay, I can't do a damn thing about this, as big as it is. And if it goes up, it goes up. And if I die, I die. It's nothing you can do about it. We spent time trying to get back to Jimmy in port steering. And we knew we couldn't get through the hangar bay. I guess hangar bay number 3. Couldn't get back there to the fantail. So here's us thinking, well, we'll just get, down below the hangar bay and go aft. Maybe we can get back, back there. Must be a door somewhere. But what we ran into were compartments that were full of water. They closed the doors. They said, I think it was condition zebra. All the watertight doors are closed and, all this stuff. Well, one of the things they teach you in boot camp is if you come to a hatch, they all have little windows in them. And if you look in a window and if it's full of water, don't open the door. Because that could, cause damage further down to things that are actually still working. And in the end, we couldn't get back to them. And I got back up on a bridge and, talking to them on sound-powered phones, and all he wanted to know was about first aid. We want to give this guy first aid. And then he started, coughing and all. I said, it's getting hard to breathe and all. And then he went blank, was gone. And I never talked to him again. We're here on the starboard side, aft in the hangar bay is the big battery lockers where they have all the batteries for the aircraft. They rebuild them, and the little carts that run around on a flight deck, and the battery lockers there. Well, they were pouring seawater in from fire hoses. What do they got? Sulfuric acid and seawater makes chlorine gas. Chlorine gas is heavier than air. It all settled down, and that's what killed Jim. Down after steering. He was awarded the Navy Marine Corps Cross for that. He did a hell of a job. We tried to get to him, we couldn't do it. We're just, just no way.
But I think a lot of the lessons learned from that fire, and again, 20 years later from the Starks fire, really led to, if you look at the Forrestal fire, you see all those sailors kind of rushing in t-shirts, or some not wearing any shirt at all. So now sailors, and for many years now, sailors have had really kind of the equivalent of the turnout gear the civilian firefighter might wear. So it gives you a lot more protection when you're trying to up close and personal deal with a shipboard fire, and gives you a lot better chance of, especially if you can catch a fire earlier, keeping it small. So that has helped a lot in modern incidents. That helped a lot on USS Cole, for instance. So the other thing that was learned was distributed stowage. So kind of the backbone of today's kind of surface Navy would be the Ollie Burke destroyers. Instead of having all of the gear in one place, it's not even all kept in the repair lockers. It's distributed throughout the ship, so that even if one of the ship's main damage control lockers takes a hit or has a fire or is damaged, then you can actually get all of this gear that you need. An issue on Forrestal, an issue in the 1980s on Samuel B. Roberts and on the Stark, was these OBAs, these oxygen breathing apparatus, which had, I think every Navy veteran of the last century is familiar with them. They had these chemical cartridges that generated oxygen. And there's a couple issues with them. One is you only can carry so many cartridges, and they have to be stored, and you need to spread them out around the ship so that you can get to them in the event that fire or smoke prevents you from getting to a storage area, that they're stored in multiple places throughout the ship. But you only carry so many of them. So it was an issue in a lot of fires in the Navy where they were running out of these canisters. And by the way, we were all taught when we went through firefighting school that when you dispose of these canisters, which are really only good for about half an hour at the most, after they're exhausted, you can't allow them to touch any petroleum products. Or they'll explode like a grenade, which is not ideal if you're if you're dealing with a fire on a ship, which you almost certainly have, spilled fuel. So that becomes a challenge. And, there's a lot of accounts of incidents where other vessels are providing these OBA canisters. The other thing is these OBA canisters, the oxygen inflates these rubber bladders. Well, these rubber bladders, if you happen to lean up against a hot surface, can melt and puncture, and there goes your breathable air. They can also collapse. If you're going through a door and push hard on the bladder, then a relief valve is going to let all that air out. So the only way to kind of refill that is to actually break seal, pull a mask off your face, breathe in contaminated air until you've refilled the bladder. So they're kind of problematic.
And Hank, I'll interrupt you. Just say I'm showing footage from Trial by Fire, and you could see a lot of the people fighting the fire are wearing T-shirts or no shirt at all.
Yeah.
And no breathing apparatus, so they're
And no breathing apparatus.
they're
I
inhaling.
thought I saw Dick
gases.
Williams. Did you have your hand up?
I did.
Good.
Dick Williams, and I'd really like to thank all who are concerned here today. And I work at Soldiers and Sailors in Oakland, and I worked with a gentleman who was on the ship. And he told me the story of he was fighting the fire, and 3 people ahead of him on the hose, okay? And I don't know exactly how many were between him and these 3 people just disappeared, okay? And I'm wondering, did the gentlemen who were on the ship, did they get any help with PTS? Because I'm sure this left a marked image in these men's lives. Did anybody?
I'm sorry, the VA has done wonders with me.
Good.
I didn't, well, back in the day when it all happened, there was no such thing as PTSD.
Right.
And, slowly over a period of time, they came to realize that, wait a minute, there is something there. And, started looking into it. Well, when I come home, after I got out of the Navy in 1968, I didn't want the ship's dentist to touch my teeth. So okay, well, I'll go to the VA when I get out. Well, I did. And it was the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. They were not ready for what was going on in Vietnam. They weren't ready for it. And they hadn't spent any money on a VA for years. Well, it really showed. But that was still, was it probably in September, October, 68, I guess it was. When I went to get the 2 teeth fixed, I said, I'll never go back to the VA again. I'll never go back. It was horrible. Well, years later, I guess I went a little around the bend. And my sister-in-law bugged the hell out of me to go to the VA. So I thought, well, I'll try it. I was, oh God, my late 60s, I guess, early 60s. But anyway, I went, and the place had changed completely. It's a wonderful place to be. And they take care of their veterans. They really take care of the veterans. I have no complaints, and it was, thank God they were there when I needed them. And the odd thing is, I didn't know I needed them. My sister-in-laws knew, but I didn't know. And they've been with me for some years now, and can't thank them enough.
Pat Hughes, I think I saw you raise your hand also, or were you just waving to me? You were just saying hi.
Me? No.
And I know we have another carrier vet, George Skivington here, and we have a Coast Guard veteran, Dale Gower. Hello, Dale. And I just point out Dale because you know what Wednesday is. Dale, why don't you tell them what Wednesday is?
Wednesday's Coast Guard Day. It's the anniversary of the 231 years ago the Coast Guard started.
And Dale, who is the founder of the Coast Guard?
I think it was Hamilton, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Hamilton. Alexander de Hamilton.
Yeah.
None of you other branches were founded by Hamilton. It was originally the Coast Guard Cutter Service. I don't know if that was original, but that was what it used to be.
Revenue Cutter Service.
But Dale, I saw you on Friday and we were talking, and because it was just you and me, I was allowed to betray my ignorance of the threat of fire on board ship. I remember very early on, and like Sean, I'm not a veteran, working with veterans, hearing from Navy vets like fire is the ship's worst enemy. Every ship carries with it the materials of its own destruction. Fire is, you every day, if you're at sea, you should be afraid of fire. And I think I didn't really get it until some sailor once explained it to me. Well, like if your house is on fire, you run outside. But just like Hank said, if your ship is on fire, that ocean is deep. There's nowhere to run. You've got to put it out. And then I asked Dale the other day, because you said very casually to me, yeah, we had a couple fires in our ships. And I said, well, how do these fires start? And you explained it pretty. Why do these ships actually catch fire? And it's not that you didn't have that much ammunition aboard your ship in the Coast Guard, right?
Yeah, we did. On the first ship I was on, it was equivalent to destroyer. We had torpedoes and a 5-inch gun and 50 calibers and things like that. But the two fires we had, one of them was in the mini turbine, which I'm not even entirely sure what that did. I think it supplied electricity or something to the ship. And the other fire we had, the first one we had on board, was actually started by welding. That's Chase there, yeah. It was in on the stern, there was a void, and they had been welding in it, and I have no idea what it was used for. A void's any space that doesn't have a specific use on a ship. And apparently one of the sparks from the welding got underneath some type of material that was on the walls. The only thing I can figure why they had this material on the walls is the void is probably sound deadening. But I was actually on quarterdeck watch, which was at the bow of the ship there. And someone came up and said that there was smoke coming out of the aft. We were in port. And we went back and it was underneath the material. It took us 2 hours to get it out. We had to rip the material off the bulkhead and go down in there. And we actually had to go down in the compartment and take it off. We poured water in it, but it didn't really seem to do anything, but because it was contained underneath the material. But we got it out. There wasn't much damage, but you never know when a fire is going to start or how when you're on the ship. So.
And you said that the struggle of fighting this fire is you're going into complete darkness filled with smoke. You don't even know where the fire's coming from, right?
Sure. The problem, most compartments in a ship don't have windows. So, and you have to, because water and electricity don't mix, you have to shut the electricity off to the compartment. So there's no lighting, there's smoke. We actually carried, there was some type of ventilation fan that they would set up to try to ventilate the smoke in the compartment when there was a fire. And also you're pouring water in. So that's not good to pour the water in the ship without taking it out. So we had pump P250 pumps we'd had to rig up to pump the water out that you were pouring in to try to put a fire out. So
we had one hell of a list on the ship from all the water we were pouring on the fire, plus the Tucker and Rupertus they were plane guard destroyers. They pulled up alongside. They were heroes. Got up alongside and aimed their water cannons towards us and did whatever they could do. You can see them right there. And they were amazing. They were amazing. It's funny. You go through boot camp. They say, here's what you got to do. But you never know, or is everybody going to do the right thing when the bad times happen? And they did. Everybody did. No one ran away. Everybody ran towards the fire. It was an amazing thing to say or to see and kind of be a part of. Probably the most important thing I did that day was get on the helm. The helmsman, both of mates usually man the helm under normal steaming and during air operations. quartermasters were the master helmsmen that, like, alongside refuel or replenishing, refueling, rearming, and all that. Quartermaster take over the helm. Well, this bosun's mate was just like, excuse my French, shit himself. He was really nervous. He knew about the bombs on the other side of the island. And I said, here, I'll take over. And I told the officer of the deck I was going to take over. And then we turned. We had lost power to the ship's engines. We lost power. The screws weren't turning. We're just drifting. We're not that far off the coast of North Vietnam, way north of DMZ.
You're in the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yes. I'm a member of the Tonkin Gulf Yacht Club. But when he finally got steerage way back, they wanted to turn into the wind to have the wind blowing over the bow and down the flight deck aft to keep the planes that they managed to save. You know, they put them all forward to keep them safe. In the meantime, there were all these guys along on the starboard side of the island rolling bombs off the side. They were rolling. The carts went over, the bombs went over, the missiles went over, everything. Which I wish I'd known when it was happening. I wouldn't have been as nervous, but everybody did the right thing. It's amazing. You know, you see a bunch of these guys, and you think, he's not capable of something like that. Well, they are capable of this. It's everybody gets the mindset, hey, we're in a Gulf of Tonkin and we're burning and we're listing badly. And we don't have, at the time, we didn't have the props weren't turning, nothing was working. And everybody did the right thing. It's amazing. Everybody deserved a medal that day.
Because they were your brothers. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. That had to be essentially, and back again, then we didn't think of it, but it was, you want to help, you want to do the right thing because it'll help your brothers out. It's the truth. We didn't really think of it that way, but it is. It's the way it is.
Yeah, you got.
Rich, you muted there for a second. Go ahead and repeat what you just said.
Oh, me. You guys were a band of brothers that day, and probably more so after, and maybe even already was before.
You know, it's funny. There's I guess the crew before the fire and the crew after the fire. You know, well, we lost a lot of guys. 134 guys, I believe it was, were killed, and a bunch injured.
134 killed, 161 injured.
161 injured, and that's
14.
Seeing what went on. That's amazing that there wasn't more.
Wasn't more. Yeah.
It took 14 hours to extinguish
A
the
lot
fire.
of guys that were killed were the night shift. Their berthing compartments were right below the flight deck.
Yeah.
And when the bombs started going, they flew right down through and decimated the squadrons. Not so much ship's company, but the squadrons that were on board.
Mark Spiridigliosi has a question. You put it in the chat. Excellent question. Could you ask it here, Mark?
Sure can, Todd. Thanks for asking me in. When the first missile was fired and it hit McCain's plane, why did it not detonate? You said that it created a fire by hitting the fuel tank.
Yeah.
I was just
Evidently, now I don't know if this is true or not. It's just what I think. But these Zuni missiles, I think they have to travel so far before they like arm themselves. I don't know if you could walk up to a plane and bang on the nose of a Zuni with a hammer and not have it go off. But maybe it was the acceleration.
Could have had a timing fuse or something like that.
Yeah. The amazing thing was, although you got to remember too, those fuel tanks are, you know, they're not like made out of iron or anything. It's just really thin aluminum, just to hold gas for a little while.
Yeah.
And it just punched right through.
I imagine that if it would have detonated, the outcome would have been much, much worse than what it was.
Actually, you're right. You're right. That would have, with the gas spreading everywhere, and these guys are sitting in their cockpits, are all ready to go. Now they got to open the canopies, get out, figure out how they're going to climb out. I guess McCain climbed off the nose plane. And again, in their mind, they know, hey, we got bombs on board. They're hanging under our wings. We got to get out of here. And the only way to do it is like jump off. McCain jumped off the nose.
I see that we have a Ken Kilmeyer, who's another expert about the USS Forrestal. And I know Ken had trouble joining us. Ken, if you want to unmute yourself and start talking, you are welcome to. I'm not sure if your microphone is working or not. I actually called you a couple times and there was no answer, just to see if you needed a hand. Ken, could you join us? You've got two cousins here, Ken, at least that I could see, Larry and Tom.
Let's see. Fire and Flight Deck out. Nice. I got to get that book.
We also had a question from George. I saw George raise his hand.
George Skivington. How are you, George?
I'm well. And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me give you a little different perspective. The fire happened in '67, as I believe. And I was on the USS John F. Kennedy, and I was what's called a damage controlman. Now, a damage controlman is responsible for the firefighting equipment on the ship, plus training of the crew. And a couple of different perspectives here that, number one, we didn't get a chance to, quote, learn from the Forrestal because we were commissioned in '68. So we basically had the same, but you got to remember there's 5,000 people on the ship. Of those, there's 50 damage control people. So that's a little bit about perspective. Number two is there are two different firefighting units on the ship. The air department controls the flight deck and the hangar bay, even though the division I was in, which is engineering, we were responsible for the firefighting on the balance of the ship. And it doesn't mean we didn't work together, but I think the Forrestal fire helped create that synergy. That goes back to the old days where you remember you had the surface fleet and the air fleet. Well, there was still some of that division on the ship. But after the Forrestal fire, that helped really cement it. And so we were really charged with keeping all the firefighting equipment up. And then number two, assisting the air department if there was a fire on the flight deck or in the hangar bay. And we had new things that they didn't necessarily have. I don't know if the Forrestal had doors on the flight deck and had what I call conflagration stations, which were definitely, you'd think of foam. I think there's a new thing called FFF they had, which is, an agent called light water that goes in the water to help put out fires. But those were manned 24 hours a day.
Those were mainly used for the aircraft, that purple K powder and light water.
Right. Well, these are integrated into the ship now, at least on the Kennedy. So we had different stations and they were manned 24 hours a day.
Wow.
So, well, part of that, and then again, I'll go back a little, part of all this comes from command. Okay, if you have good command and you have a good, what is called a DCA or a damage control assistant who does a lot of preventative work, that lessens the chances of a large conflagration. Except like the Forrestal, there's not too much you could do there. I mean, it's a different thing.
Our
And,
engineering officers were wonderful.
They're usually what are called LDOs, limited duty officers that grew up in engineering. They're commissioned officers, but they started off as seamen and they came up the chain. So they learned a lot of here, and they're instrumental. They had to often battle a captain because the captain has different priorities. I mean, he's trying to get airplanes launched. Well, you got to be very careful doing that. I mean, we had all kinds of different we had a number of fires on the Kennedy, but none serious.
Mhm.
They were smoking, people smoking. There was a lot of smoking 68 to 72 when I was on there. We had electrical fires. We had some lube oil fires, but none of them were serious because we had it compartmentalized off. And the last comment I'll tell you is the one you're talking about, the Bahami Richard, that was in port. So you don't have near the crew.
Yeah.
And nobody, and it's just the fact that changed. A lot of divisions did not want to have people sent to the fire parties. So in port, you'll have an in-port fire party. That's one of the things I ran, was an in-port fire party. Well, sometimes you'd get the most inexperienced people because people didn't want to. Remember, they all have full-time jobs. All right. All these other people on the ship have full-time jobs, and now they also have to do fire party. So, and when you're on that ship in port, as was mentioned before, all those hatchways have got hoses running through them. So there's no protection. And I also heard that the firefighting system on the Bahami Richard was down, the main firefighting system. Well, when it goes down, then you have to put more manning to it, or somebody has to elevate it to get fixed faster. I mean, if a bridge goes down, you just don't say, gee, the bridge is down, you got to fix it. So I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but you got to stay on top of these things. And we had superior command up in the, from the commanding officer down. That was a key, I think, we didn't have any serious issues. So,
and I think you made a real good point, George. It really does come down to the training and the crew, and I think we're going to read once everything's published on the Bonham Richard. I mean, there really is no excuse for having primary firefighting systems down without it.
Absolutely. And it's amazing to me, after all we've learned, that we go back. This is cyclical. We're going back and doing the same thing again. We don't need more fire marshals. We need the people who are in charge to do their duties and to make sure the other people are doing their duties.
When I got on a Forrestal, she was in a shipyard. I guess that SLEP, Service Life Extension policy or whatever. So they were in Portsmouth in dry dock, but there's all the yard workers everywhere. And all those yard workers were either welding or burning. What we did, everybody was assigned as a fire watchman. And if anybody's going to do any welding, you had to have a Forrestal sailor there. Or any burning, had to have a Forrestal sailor there. They were very, very strict about that. And there was torches and, welders and burning outfits everywhere. Sparks are always flying. But we managed to keep the ship from burning down in dry dock.
One thing we learned, that's another thing we learned that we didn't do a very good job at. When we're in port, we didn't integrate remember, on a base, they normally have their own fire department. A naval base, Army base, they have their own fire department. And then, of course, you have wherever you are, a city of Norfolk, San Diego. We didn't integrate them. And I think that we started to do that when I got out, so that if you're in port, which is your most dangerous spot, mostly, because you don't have the security of being able to do the watertight comparison. We started integrating and have them on board to see what we were doing, how we do it, how will we fit in, how should they respond. And so, I think that's why I still don't understand what happened with this is what, 50 years later?
Well, the other challenge that maybe the older Navy veterans aren't familiar with, and Coast Guard veterans, is, in the old days, you were probably in Port Norfolk or San Diego in 3 or 4 section duty. So you had probably 25 or 30% of the crew on board. That's not really the case now. The fleet commanders, quite a few years ago now, as part of a quality of life initiative designed to help retention, etc., really moved most of the crew off. So now only the duty section will stay on board. The rest are living in barracks ashore, maybe a mile or two away from the ship. And as you folks know, a fire can get out of control in seconds.
Yes.
So Bonham Richard, and I'm not sure if she was in 8 or 10 section duty, but if you do the math, she probably had about 10% of her sailors on board, which kind of explains why very quickly, that small section would have gotten overwhelmed, particularly if they, again, when I joined that ship in dry dock, it was a nonstop battle with the folks who were, again, a lot of them without experience, who were working in the shipyard, who would run lines through some oxygen, acetylene, other flammable lines through watertight doors designed to allow the ship to compartmentalize to prevent the spread of smoke or fire. They'd run them through, and me and my damage controlman were constantly battling with them, saying, no, you need to put a quick disconnect there. We need to isolate so that if there is a fire, which we had several during my time on Bonham Richard, but all pretty small, so that we can very quickly localize and put out that fire before it becomes a major damage. And a lot of folks who maybe haven't served on those ships might not be familiar with how we actually got up steam on a steamship. You took a torch, which was a metal stick, basically, with a rag on the end. You dipped it in fuel and you ignited it with a propane torch, and then you stuck it in a hole in the side of the boiler. And that's how you ignited the fuel air mixture inside the boiler, started to heat water and produce steam. So that's kind of inherently dangerous. That was done over 100 years ago, and that's what Bonham Richard did when I was on her, a little over 10 years ago. So as opposed to modern like gas turbine ships, gas turbines tend to run very hot, and you have a lot of fuel lines and lubricating lines that run all around the engine. And sometimes they'll get a leak and it drips on a hot surface and it'll ignite. Well, those gas turbines on a modern ship live inside a module or a box. So if you have a fuel leak and it leaks onto the engine, you get a fire, you have what's called a Bravo in a box. So you have a fire that's contained inside this insulated metal box, and you shut the engine down and you can dump either water or CO2, whatever fire suppression system you have, and the fire's out. It doesn't really endanger the engine room. So a lot of our smaller ships are safer because we still have these old steamships that have the boilers, like the Bonham Richard, like the Forrestal, like the JFK, where they have the boilers in these big machinery rooms. And the only way to feed that boiler is to have fuel in pressurized lines going right up to that boiler front. And that's something that always terrified me on Bonham Richard. One thing I would say, George, is we had learned a lot from the veterans who went before us, and the air department and the engineering department worked very closely, drilled all the time on how we were going to support the flight deck if there was a fire up there, how if we had a major engine room fire, how they were going to help support us. So we actually had some of the air folks backing up some of the surface folks. And that's pretty important because by naval regulations, aircraft carriers are commanded by aviators. So they're not surface ship sailors. They're not as familiar with firefighting and damage control as maybe the folks who've sailed on ships for a life are.
If I can interject.
There you go.
That's how you light a boiler.
They were
Yeah, exactly.
No wonder there are fires.
No, they never had a fire there, though. Those don't cause fires.
We had the world's best commanding officer, and he had the world's best damage control people and engineering officers. Merv Rowland was one of the gentlemen. His name was commander. Older fella. And without Merv, we'd have sunk. He found a way to get the rudders and the engines working again and get power transferred to where it had to be to get pumps to pump water out. We're pumping tons and tons of water in, and it wasn't going anywhere. I forget what, a 15-degree list, I think. We had a hell of a list. Somewhere there's a picture, it shows us way over.
Yeah.
But thanks to Marvel and his engineering people, here we are today. And John Beeling, the captain of our ship, was as good a man as you would ever find anywhere on the whole earth. He was a wonderful guy. He was an Airedale. He did flying in World War II, but he was one hell of a captain. And I could have asked for any better.
Phil, you said earlier there was the crew before the fire and the crew after the fire. Can you talk a bit about how the crew came together after the fire? How did everybody pick up the pieces?
Well, I didn't know the ship's company was like 2,000 people, I think it was. Roughly around 2,000. And then when you get the air wings aboard, it's another 3,000. So about 5,000 on board the ship. But you might not know the name of everybody. You see these people day after day. You might know, hey, nod or something. But there's a difference between the guys that were on board the ship when it was on fire and the people that came in, and replaced them after we got back in Norfolk. It was like a closed, I don't know, it's hard to explain. We just, I guess we figured, if they didn't go through that fire, they were shit, which was entirely the wrong way of thinking. But I don't know, it seemed some reason something happened and we all became closer. We didn't realize it, but we did. And you could see the way the new guys that were just coming on board the ship to replace those who were lost or injured. First of all, you could always tell them because they go, where is this? Or where, how do I get to this deck and all? Okay, we were one of them. But it was an amazing thing to watch everybody on board that ship come together. Everybody did what they were supposed to do. People did way above what they were expected to do. And I can remember that night, the night when all the fires were out, you still couldn't go aft in the hangar deck very far because of the chlorine gas. It was still like, don't go there. I slept, there were these nets that would off the bow end of the ship. There were nets, like if you fell off the flight deck, rolled off, you'd land in a net. You almost had to jump over the net to get into the water. That's what I slept in. It was steel cable, and I just got a blanket, and a couple of us guys, we just got in the nets, threw the blankets down, went to sleep. Nothing was working. Well, you got to have some kind of air circulation in a ship, or otherwise they get. And besides that, right through our compartment was a catapult steam line. So in normal conditions, that was hotter than hell, and all. They had a lot of insulation around it, but it still got hot. So we had a big air conditioner, which I don't remember ever working, but it made noise. It moved some air. Well, we didn't have that after the fire. So we kind of slept where we could outside.
Did command ever try to bring the two groups together, the group that actually experienced the fire and the new people that took the place of the people that passed? Did that ever happen?
I don't know. That was probably well above. I was a third class petty officer, and that was way above my pay grade.
Okay.
But according to Captain Beeling, we were all members of the Forrestal. And actually, that was the truth. You're a member, you're a crew member on the ship, act like one. But as I had mentioned, it's just, it's hard to explain. I mean, we didn't hold anything against the new guys, the new people. But there was just a difference, just a little bit.
Phil, is there a particular way that you choose to remember those that lost their lives during the fire each year?
I remember one person that I knew personally, Jim Blaskus. He's the guy that relieved me on watch, and he's the guy that that passed away that day. And the thing about why I really felt bad about that, not only was my friend, but we had an E6 in our division that made up the watch bill. And for some reason, he was mad at me for something. So anyway, I was supposed to have the 8 o'clock at night till 12 o'clock at night watch. And then Jim was supposed to have it's all worked out where, anyway, our watches were switched. Mm-hmm. He was supposed to have the 4 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning watch. And then I'd have the 8 o'clock in the morning to noon watch, which is a pretty cake, thing. You get up, you go and watch, no big deal. So in order to give me a hard time, he switched Jim and I around, which under normal circumstances would just, been no big deal. I just got to get up in the middle of the night. Well, it was a big deal because he was there when I should have been. And it's that survivor's guilt, and it just eats at you. Didn't have much to say to the guy that E6 afterwards. But you know what? It's just every year. This is, even if I don't think about it at all, when July 29th gets close, like a light goes on, see?
Creeps up on you. Yeah.
It's here we go again. I've managed to get to Washington, D.C. a couple of times to the wall. Jim's name's on that, on the wall. And as I mentioned earlier, I got in miracles of all miracles. I got in touch with his son through Ken Kilmeyer's group. And, we talk. I'm going to go out and visit Jim's grave here. He's in Cleveland now. But you never forget. You just don't. It was such a horrible thing. And it was, where do you point the finger? It was just a horrible bunch of things went wrong all at the same time.
I see we have several sailors here, Chris Perolo and Dale Gower, of course. Do we have any other questions or comments from Chad Riddle, from sailors who might remember firefighting school or the training or anything like that? Chris.
I was at Great Lakes during the winter time, and it gets pretty cold up there, so they shut down the firefighting school. This is 1974. So in 1975, I'm assigned to Commander 6th Fleet staff, but they were embarked upon on the cruiser Little Rock, and they made sure I didn't go over there until I went to 2 weeks of firefighting and damage control in Norfolk. So it was a serious matter that anybody, no matter what their job or who they were assigned to, if you are embarked aboard a vessel, you better know how to man a hose or how to patch pipe. So I had that experience. But I also wanted to mention 2 other fires. The USS Belknap, which struck the Kennedy in of all things, November 22nd of 1975. And the superstructure burned right down to the O1 level. And I had the chance to meet a crewman came aboard the Little Rock, and I asked him about that fire, and he said that when it all broke out, everybody moved to either the aft or the bow or the stern, and they were pouring water into the center over the aluminum superstructure. And I said to him, "Why didn't you guys get off the ship?" And he looked at me with a quite serious face and said, "Are you crazy? You know how black it is in the middle of the Mediterranean? You've been there. Do you know how black it is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea? As long as the vessel is floating in any listing or not, as long as the vessel is floating, you never leave the vessel for your own survival, let alone to fight the fire." Right. And they didn't fight until they got help, and they fought. They refused to leave even when they got help. They were fighting from on board the vessel. So that was very interesting lessons early in my career about the seriousness of that. And then one other fire I wanted to mention, and that was the Nimitz in May of 1981, when an aircraft, when an E6 came down and pretty much took out quite a few planes on the deck. I'm pretty sure, and you can make a comment on this, I'm pretty sure firefighting lessons from the Forrestal were applied in that case, because it probably was the most serious deck fire of an aircraft carrier since the Forrestal. That was 1981. That's all I want to say.
The Oriskany had a fire
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
in the Gulf of Tonkin. There was a fire in a flare locker, which must have been horrible. You know, I don't know to this day, you know, what started or how it happened. But a kid I went to high school with was on the Oriskany when it burned, and that was a heck of a time. Aircraft carriers burn. It's, you know, you have bombs, you have aviation fuel, you have all the things that you really don't want to put together, but you got them all together in one spot. You know, something happens, and thank God it hasn't happened in a lot of years.
And you know, the other thing Dale Gower told me on Friday was another reason why there are fires is these ships never turn off. They have systems that never shut down. They're going for weeks and weeks and months and months. It's not like your car, you know, you drive it for 600 miles and then, you know, then you turn it off and leave it overnight. These systems go on and on and on and on. So Leo West, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, what about the Liberty ships or the troop ships that were taking people across? Did they ever have fire crews?
A lot of them in the Navy had actually, at the end of World War II, collected those battle damage reports. In fact, when I was writing the thesis on the Forrestal fire, I went to the Navy Yard, and at the operational archives of the Navy, they were digitizing a lot of those. So a lot of those are available as PDFs. I hope they've been turned over to the Navy History and Heritage Command, but I couldn't speak for that. I have a number of them. A lot of the Navy's damage control leadership, civilian and military, have access to those, and they've actually took a look at a lot of that when they put together a lot of the guidance. And kind of every time one of these big incidents happens, the Navy tries to put it into the damage control kind of training books, which are getting thicker and thicker by the year as a result. Definitely learned a lot from just mishaps, shipboard fires, as well as enemy action, all of the torpedo damage and the kamikaze damage during the war. That really informed a lot of the damage control.
You know,
doctrine.
I'm looking at the clock. It's 8:35, and I think Avi Hall might be getting a little restless. Is that true? Is that what I hear in the background there, Sean?
She's asleep. I think that's on
Oh.
Hank's line. I don't know if that was your cat, Hank.
Oh, might have been. I guess the other bit is we had a saying that, you know, in the Navy, we went to sea with last year's high school graduating class. The average sailor age was 19 to 20, and in the typical Navy ship is either deployed, getting ready to deploy, or kind of doing maintenance after having been deployed. So you have a lot of turnover, and you've got a really young, inexperienced workforce. So in this kind of hazardous environment, the training is really a never-ending job. And you've really, I think a lot of people touched on it, but the ship's leadership has to be all over, kind of laser focused on bad things will happen if we're not vigilant and trained.
Absolutely.
So it's an enduring challenge.
Todd, remember when you go to firefighting school or you go to damage control school, it's a week.
Right.
Okay? It's a week each. You go to it. You might not have an incident for 2 years. So, you know, you can't rotate those people back to fire. You just couldn't do it and keep the ships going, especially at the tempo they're at today. I mean, they're at a higher tempo today than they've ever been.
And
that's why they're wearing out.
Smaller crews. I'm amazed at how small some of these crews are in these big ships.
That's right.
Although the automation has helped out. So we had a flood on Bonhomme Richard when I was there. And, you know, from the damage control console, I could push buttons and I could isolate the portions of the fire main that were affected. The first couple buttons I pushed, nothing happened because those valves are underwater. They were electrically operated and shorted out. So I went 2 more valves back. So the automation has really helped. And a lot of the systems will sense themselves if there's an issue, send an alarm, and an operator can very very quickly and easily isolate the damaged sections and sometimes activate a fire suppression system without it even being there. So that's helped a lot, along with, of course, engines being in modules, so you don't have as many ships that are equipped with the old, stick the flaming torch on the side of the boiler.
Did you
They're
have
still
to,
out
did you have to manually close doors? Like when they say second edition yoke?
there.
Or
Yes.
could you do it from a console?
So on a lot of ships today, you're pushing a button from a console, and even in the hangar bay, those doors are closing.
Yeah.
And they're going to close because they're hydraulically operated, and God help you if you're standing there. So the sailors are all trained to get clear of those doors, and you sound the bridge, or you sound the alarm. But you also have throughout the ship watertight doors that you can activate from the bridge, from damage control central, from the engineering control stations. You push a button, and a lot of these doors are held open by electromagnets, and you just interrupt the circuit, and those doors close. Of course, you got to tell people to stand clear so nobody gets hurt. But you can really effectively isolate the ship from the bridge, from the control stations pretty quickly. Same thing in the hangar bay. You can just close off these doors and compartmentalize the vessel. It should have happened on Bonhomme Richard. We should not have seen those pictures that we did, but sometimes you still need an operator on board to push the button, and if you leave the vessel, that's a problem.
If I remember correctly, when we came off the line after the fire in Vietnam, we came back into the Philippines, and the carrier that was going to go out to replace us, it was a Bonhomme Richard. It was the aircraft carrier Bonnie Dick.
It was, and we had a lot of memorabilia from that ship on my ship, which was the third Bonhomme Richard.
They weren't very happy about having to go back, right? Back because you're out there for 6 months, and it's what is it, 12 on, 4 off, or something like that. It was a ridiculous pace. Well, they weren't happy, so we're in a Longapo, and a couple of fights occurred over that. But yeah, I can see their point, though. Being on the line was kind of rough, I guess.
Dick Williams, I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask this question. I taught a course on oral history for 25 years. And I'm just wondering from anybody that are there oral histories of these disasters? Because the oral history gives you one point of view and the actual factual details, okay? But if you have an oral history, you can learn a lot from it and check it against the factual background. Are there oral histories of these disasters at all?
I personally don't know. Ken Kilmar does one heck of a job keeping us invested. He has log entries. You go on Facebook and you see the entries. He has log entries from the ship. Every day you can get a different log entry, exactly what's going on with who and whatever. I don't know how I managed to get them. I think it's wonderful we can do that, because you wonder. One of my duties as a quartermaster of the watch, would you keep the ship's log? Everything goes on, you got to write it all down. And you think, well, it struck me years later, what do they do with all this stuff? Well, evidently somebody got it because Ken got to him. It's great.
Yeah.
But oral history, I don't know. Ken would probably be, he's so invested in the job he does. He'd probably be the guy to talk to about that,
Yeah.
The Navy actually, or the Naval Institute actually has a lot of oral histories from all kinds of veterans. And Phil, if you get a chance, I would reach out to them, because unfortunately, there aren't a lot of folks still around with firsthand experience. It was so many years ago now.
Right.
Forrestal fire. I think it would be important to capture a lot of the firsthand knowledge that you have.
You know what? I got a book. Let me grab it.
I'd also placed in the chat a YouTube of the new Navy, what is this called? The Navy damage controlman. They created a new sort of marketing material for that role. If anybody wants to check that out on YouTube. And boy, I wish, Todd, we had gotten to the KC-130 landing on the Forrestal as well for Ben Wright.
I want to, just incredible stuff. I mean, look at this. This is a C-130 landing on the USS Forrestal in 1963. It still is the record for the most tonnage, the most cargo, the largest plane ever to land on a ship, on a carrier. They did it many, many times over the course of 1963. I mean, many, many times, a few dozen times. Now, it took them, 100 tries to get a few dozen times. Because and the first time it was ever done, it was like in 50-mile-an-hour headwinds. Really crazy. I want to ask Ben Wright, could you imagine landing, you're a C-130 pilot, landing on an aircraft carrier deck?
Well, it could be done, but that was mostly, Lockheed wanted to advertise the capability of the aircraft, and the Navy evidently went along with it. But like I say, they didn't do it, very many times. But the 130, when you went max reverse on the engines, you had 60% of the forward thrust. And of course, they would be doing it lightweight to where your approach speed was lower, and like I say, carriers are always into the wind, and then the brakes on 130 are very, very good. You can they're very, very effective with full anti-skid on them.
This is so great. So I'm sorry, I just want to say, so Ben is giving us the inside dope, the scuttlebutt on what this was really about, which was a publicity stunt for Lockheed. And it's I watched this video, very interesting video. And they say, like, yeah, after all this experiment, the Navy said, you know what, we could never actually do this in an operation situation. So we're just not even gonna, try. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, but no, that was my understanding of why they did it.
It looks like that was a B model also. It didn't.
How did they get it off?
How'd they get it off the deck, Ben? They could just take off?
Well, that's, sometimes you could land and you couldn't take off unless you offloaded. Yeah. So, I mean, the aircraft would have been, at minimum operating weight, and they wouldn't have had a lot of fuel on it.
Okay.
And once again, you pointed into the wind.
That was my question, Todd, because when you see the Second World War fighter planes taking off, all of a sudden they disappear below the deck, yes, and then you see them come back up. I can't figure out how. That's a takeoff right there.
That's a takeoff.
I would have assumed it would have flattened and come down.
Yes,
a little bit.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, the reason they would get out of ground effect, the wingtip vortices actually give you a lift when you're close to the ground, and you tell, especially when you're landing, when you're in the flare to land. And you would watch. We used to watch the tankers and bombers take off out of Guam, and they would go below the cliff and then come back. But they would get out of ground effect, and then they would fly a little longer, and then they'd come up again.
You guys might get a kick out of this. Is I actually found this picture on Instagram, being the young guy I am, and the caption was "real or fake."
Okay.
For people to guess whether this really did happen, and there was some good comments beneath that, people thinking that this was a fake picture.
Oh, that's so cool. Hey, Larry Kilmeyer, I see you have your hand up.
Real quick, I talked with my brother earlier this evening, and my first duty station was Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet Headquarters. And when the Enterprise had their fire, we like to talk on this show, scuttlebutt. Well, the scuttlebutt went through the fleet headquarters. They lost the Big E. She sunk. I mean, that
was the scuttlebutt. Ooh. That
was the scuttlebutt. Well, then the helicopters came in and picked everybody up from the fleet. Right. Flew them out. They flew around, brought them back, landed, and but that was an interesting time to be at. That building sits above Pearl Harbor, looking down on the harbor. And at that time, we had 5 admirals. We had a a 4-star, a 3-star, and 3 2-stars. And Navy captains and were a dime a dozen. I'm serious. And so when you hear the Big E sunk, the word went through that building, something fierce. But that's just my, I wanted to share scuttlebutt. That's scuttlebutt from from Big E's time.
That's
it
so
for tonight.
great. Phil Meyer, what are you holding up there?
It's the front page of the Pittsburgh Press on Saturday, July 29th, 1967. Here it is. It says fire whips carrier, 26 killed, jets burn up. It was front page news. I don't know if you can see it. I'm probably not.
Oh yeah.
I got, some of the stuff I saved over the years, but we now you could if you're in the Navy or whatever, you're on a ship, you could call home if you want to, go on a computer, whatever. We couldn't do that. So we had to wait to get back into the Philippines, which took a long time because, we had holes through the bottom of the ship and all that. And so when we got back, there's all these guys still on board. Now there's only a couple of phones, to get on the gangplank and you're on a pier. There's only a couple of phones there for a couple thousand guys. It took a while. And the best part is you couldn't call from the Philippines. We couldn't call from the Philippines like to McKees Rocks, long distance. What we did is we called ham operators in California, I think it was, tell them what we want to say, and they would then get on a phone and call my parents and said, well, he's still alive.
And those were volunteer ham operators. I've read about them.
Yeah.
And I always thought it would be fun to have some of them on the program sometime. People who just volunteered to relay messages from Vietnam back home. I think that's the coolest thing. Coolest thing.
We couldn't give these big messages. It was just like, hey, mom and dad, I'm alive. Everything's fine.
Right.
I'll call you when we get back to the United States. But just to let them know, that we were still with the living. Right. They offloaded nukes. When we got back to Civic Bay, they announced over the ship's communications, the 1MC, that everybody just stay away from this area. And they didn't say what was going on. But then you notice there's the Marines, we had, Marine station on board. They have their BARs handy. And what they were doing is they were offloading, from what I understand, offloading nuclear weapons. The Forrestal carried them.
I want to say, before we go, I just want to say hi to Rendell Bergman. Good to see you back. I haven't seen you in a while. And you put an interesting question here in the chat. Was the communication to the States with Mars, MARS?
There you go.
I've heard Mars before. What is that? What was Mars?
Mars, it was just like he was saying, our communication that we had on ship when I was in a communication unit. One of the guys, our staff sergeant, volunteered his time, and it was like we would talk on a phone. It would go to a ham operator, and then it'd go over. So you would, as you talk, you would say over, so that the radio operator would switch his thing off, so the other communication could come by. It was so different back then as to what it is now.
Yeah.
It's so amazing.
That is amazing. Oh, that is neat. That is very cool.
I want to thank everybody for being a part of this tonight. That was a very interesting conversation, way more broad than I was anticipating. We learned a lot about a lot of the fires that have happened throughout the last century, really. And I didn't know you started boilers with a stick on fire. So I get to walk away with some more knowledge, but appreciate honoring the veterans that were lost on the Forrestal. And Todd, any parting words here?
Yeah, I learned a lot. If I face a fire, I think I'll still panic. no matter what I learned. But just absolutely, it's one of these aspects of military service, especially in the Navy, Coast Guard, that if you're not a veteran, you have no idea how much thought, care, attention, training, vigilance goes into preventing a disaster like the one that occurred on the Forrestal in 1967. And it's just another little aspect of service that people like me don't know anything about. And so we're very grateful to all of you for coming on and sharing your experience and wisdom and giving us some enlightenment. Because I know that like Jim Jamison too in the Air Force, he didn't learn that kind of stuff. Jim was having a good time. He didn't have to worry about fires.
Richard?
Yeah.
Hey, one last point. I have to say this. I am Zooming so many times during COVID, but nobody, no organization does it like you guys.
Oh, thanks.
Nobody did 3 a week, okay? And on a continuous basis. And I just like to express my appreciation because of what you do for veterans and for me as a non-veteran. And thank you for all your work and the staff that you have, because I'm being objective because I love the organization, but I am objective because I've Zoomed too many times.
Thank you, Dick. You deserve the last word, I think. Thank you.
Phil, thank you. Commander Stewart, thank you both. Ken Kilmeyer, thank you for joining us. Larry, Tom, everyone, really appreciate all your time tonight and your comments and thoughts. Boy, another great one, Todd. Appreciate you and NVBC and looking forward to this coming Saturday, Heather Penny, and next week, next Monday. We'll see you all back here Monday night.
All right.